A whisper is not weak when it comes from Christ. That is the movement Pope Leo XIV placed before Christians at the Sunday Angelus in St. Peter's Square. Jesus tells his disciples in the Gospel of St. Matthew, "What I say to you in the dark, tell in the light. And what you hear whispered, proclaim from the housetops." The public mission begins somewhere hidden first. It begins in the heart, where the disciple has actually received what will later be spoken. That is why evangelization cannot survive as technique alone. A church can have methods, tools, platforms, and plans, but if the gospel has not first become personal encounter, the words lose weight. Christian witness is not first a performance. It is a life carrying what it has heard from Christ. The public word begins in the hidden room. St. Peter's Square was the public setting, but Pope Leo XIV's message came from a gospel scene where Jesus sends his disciples into mission only after first speaking to them in intimacy. That order matters. The disciple does not invent the message in public. The disciple receives it from the Lord, carries it in the heart, and only then proclaims it in the light. The passage came from the Gospel of St. Matthew, and Pope Leo recalled that Matthew was speaking to Christian communities that knew hostility and persecution. These were not believers practicing faith in easy conditions. They faced pressure, misunderstanding, and the real temptation to let weariness or fear take control. That makes the Pope's reflection more than a spiritual reminder. It is a lesson for mission under pressure. St. Matthew's world is not as distant as it looks. There are still Christians today who live their faith under hostility, suspicion, or open persecution. Others may not face the same danger, but they know a different pressure. The pressure to soften the gospel, to trade witness for acceptance, or to let discouragement slowly shrink the mission. That is why Leo did not begin with strategy. Pope Leo's first point was that authentic evangelization springs from a personal encounter with Christ. He drew attention to the contrast inside Jesus' words. What is heard in private is later proclaimed publicly. That contrast matters because the gospel cannot be credibly announced as borrowed language. It has to pass through a real life first. The Pope said proclaiming the gospel is first and foremost the sharing of a personal encounter with Christ. And that encounter is unique to each person. That does not make the gospel private or individualistic. It means the disciple cannot speak as if faith were only an idea, a slogan, or a religious inheritance. The witness has to come from contact with the Lord. Then Leo named what gives Christian mission its strength. It does not depend primarily on techniques, tools, methods, or resources. Those can help, but they cannot replace grace. The strength of any apostolate comes from the work of the Holy Spirit within believers and from the authenticity of their response to God's grace. That is a hard correction for a church that can be tempted to measure mission by organization alone. To make the point, Pope Leo recalled St. Thomas Aquinas and the phrase, contemplata alias tradere, passing on to others what one has contemplated. Preaching, in that vision, is not spiritual marketing. It is the overflow of a life that has looked at God long enough to speak truthfully. The Church does not hand on what it merely manages. It hands on what it has received. Then the Pope removed a common excuse. Contemplation is not reserved only for a few saints, monks, or hermits. Every Christian is called to carve out moments of silence amid daily responsibilities. That silence is not empty. It is the place where believers listen to God, entrust Him with joys and concerns, and review life in His presence. Those moments form disciples who are credible and free. Pope Leo said they help faith become firmer and more conscious, and they allow Christians to reflect the light of the gospel in every circumstance. That is why contemplation is not withdrawal from mission. It is where mission receives its roots. The hidden life of prayer was not an escape from conflict. It was preparation for it. Christians still face the pressure St. Matthew's communities knew. The pressure to grow tired, to become afraid, or to let hostility decide the shape of their witness. Pope Leo did not describe this as a problem from the past. He said the challenge remains unchanged. The disciple still has to remain faithful to Jesus' teachings and proclaim his word when the surrounding atmosphere is not friendly. That is why the Pope's final contrast matters. Christians are called to respond to hatred with love, to arrogance with meekness, and to discouragement with perseverance. None of that is automatic. Love can look weak when hatred is loud. Meekness can look powerless when arrogance dominates. Perseverance can feel unreasonable when discouragement has become familiar. Yet this is exactly where Christian witness becomes recognizable. The world greatly needs Christ's message of hope, love, and peace, Pope Leo said. But that message cannot be carried by disciples who are only louder than everyone else. It has to be carried by people whose roots go deeper than reaction. Pope Leo echoed the teaching of Pope Francis in Evangelii Gaudium by tying mission to an intimate relationship with the Lord. The gospel becomes credible when the messenger has been changed by the one being proclaimed. That is the real test of evangelization now. Not whether Christians can find better techniques, not whether they can win every argument, not whether they can answer contempt with more contempt. The test is whether they can stay close enough to Christ that their public witness still sounds like him. The world does not need louder Christians first. It needs rooted ones. The whisper was never meant to stay hidden. It was meant to become a witness that still sounds like Christ when the world answers with hatred, arrogance, and discouragement. If this helped you understand what the Church is actually doing in the world, liking the video helps more people find this kind of Catholic coverage. Subscribe for more Catholic news, Vatican context, and stories from the living history of the Church. And tell me in the comments, where do Christians today most need to learn to respond with love instead of matching the anger around them? The story continues, and so does the work.